Well, good evening, everyone. I'm John OLoughlin, and welcome once again to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And tonight I was going to do a minefields, but I tell you, I think my mind was blown already today with my interview earlier today with the great author Doug Valentine. And I tell you, I came away from that just feeling a whole lot more grounded as a person, and feeling more confident that I do have a handle on what happened with my dad's life. And that helps me to explain a lot of things about what happened, just with my family generally, that we were completely baffled by some of the things that happened during my dad's last 4 or 5 years. And now it looks very, very likely that what we saw was the effects of, the CIA's mind control programs, which I don't think ever succeeded with him, but we're still studying that. And, nothing has really made me feel so good as confirmation that my dad was doing something for us, for the good guys, and trying to stop this horrible epidemic of opiates that has just gotten worse and worse ever since then. And that story is recorded by Doug Valentine in this book here. It's called TDY. And I want you to get yourself a copy of it if you haven't got one already. Now is a great time to get a copy of TDY and read it as we approach my father's 50th anniversary of his death on June the 6th of this year. And that will be the focus of my work for the next 3 months, is getting ready for that. There's enough copies for everybody. Now, TDY is written in the first person, and you get the impression as you read it that the author of the book is the person who is the protagonist in the book. But it's called a novel, and it says based on a true story. So what I think we have here is a roman à clef, which the term for a novel that has certain things concealed so as not to reveal secrets, or not to injure people, or not to get not to get banned, not to there's just certain things that we can't say, but we feel that the story is big enough that we really need to tell the story anyway. I'm starting to feel that way about my father, to be honest with you, that there's certain things that just will never be said, but there are certain things that must be said. And as I continue working toward that 50th anniversary, I continue focusing more and more. And you'll hear more from me on the show about my dad. I've been concentrating on the election for the past 4, 5, 6 months, and that's over now. And I'm moving on. So it's time to get back to McDuff and the story of my father. By the way, tonight's show is once again brought to you by our friends at Belvoir Fruit Farms Organic Ginger Beer. That's the best ginger beer in my experience. I've never had a better ginger beer. And the reason that I like it so much is because it has that ginger bite to it. It's not a wimpy drink. And I know I should be putting on my mute button, but God darn it, listening to it pour is part of the experience for me. And, so you can mute if you want, but me, I'm going to let it fizz, So cheers. I see Andy's put George Webb's book about my dad up there. And of course, that ID on the front of the picture there, that shows him in his professional look. That would have been the look of the character in TDY, who's called Mr. Hammer. So if you see that guy, and you see how big he is. He's 6'4", almost 6'4", but you see that guy looking at you in the eyes like that, I think you take him pretty seriously. He never looked at us that way. He was a good man and loved his children and loved his wife and was as good as he possibly could be under the horrific circumstances. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the first person storyteller here, which is a real person. He was an Air Force enlisted man who had some skill in photography and early filmmaking, or videography, I should say. And whether we ever learn his name or not, we have Doug's word on it that this is a real guy and this is a real story. So I'm taking it as real as I can because it helps me understand. Well, I want to know a little bit more about this man who wrote the story, or at least told the story to Doug Valentine for Doug to write it down. So I just want to read from the introduction to the book, and I may have some comments as we go along. But this is just my way of gratitude to Doug for his work, and what a wonderful feeling I had this morning as we went over things. And it's interesting that we were both looking at it in the terms of a Rudyard Kipling scenario, in that Kipling was the ultimate. He calls him a propagandist, and I wasn't going to go there myself, but I guess I have to admit, I mean, plus Doug knows the literature better than I do, that yeah, he was, but more than that, I think he was an imperialist. He was simply somebody that loved the British Empire and thought it was the greatest possible way to govern. And, you know, he was in favor of the Boer War. He was in favor of a lot of stuff that we would consider just inhumane and even genocidal. And of course, he lost his son in the First World War, and that was a price that he paid, which he said because we lied, because the fathers lied. So, you know, how many times will the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? That's my Bob Dylan version of the same question. Yeah, there's some video from today, and definitely one of the most satisfying interviews I've ever had the pleasure of conducting. Just great. Okay, well, let's read this introduction, which is the only thing I really want to accomplish tonight, and just share some more thoughts about my dad. I put Dad's picture up here over my shoulder, and so he's kind of looking down upon us tonight too. Introduction. After I was discharged from the Air Force in 1970, I enrolled at Fulton Montgomery College in New York. And in the fall of 1971, I transferred to the Rochester Institute of Technology. The incidents I'm about to relate happened at Fulton in the spring of 1971 and at Rochester in the fall of 1971. These incidents had to do with the fact that I was a member of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, VVAW. So I want to stop right here and just put this in the context of my life and my father's life. That he was discharged in 1970. I graduated from high school in 1970, and I enrolled at William & Mary. Well, he was at Fulton Montgomery College in New York. Okay. So, except for his years in the Air Force, we would have been contemporaries, but that makes him a few years older than I am. Then he transferred to, in the fall of 1971, to Rochester Institute of Technology. But it's in the spring of 71 that this conversation starts happening with this young Air Force guy. And here's what I was doing was in the spring of 1971, I was completing my first year of college, knowing that my father had terminal cancer. And well, not knowing it in the early spring. In the early spring, he was given his award, the Meritorious Civilian Service Award that I have, the medal and everything that I've shown you on the show. And it was at that time that he told my mother, he said, "It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to me, but you can come if you want to." And so we all said, yeah, we wanted to go. So we went, but it was very sullen and solemn and sad occasion. We got into the deep bowels of the Pentagon inside some vault, and there was a podium there and the generals, and my, somebody just read a proclamation and gave him this medal, and that was it. And we left, and it was entirely forgettable. But the point is that was given to him by the Joint Chiefs of Staff themselves. It was signed by Melvin Laird, the Secretary of Defense, and Admiral Thomas Moore, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So very serious and important thing in historical terms that McDuff was given. What was told to us at the time, and I believe that it was at the time, the highest civilian award that the Pentagon could give, that the Defense Department could give. There's some controversy now about Henry Kissinger getting something that was supposedly a higher level, but I'm a little skeptical about that. I'll have to research it sometime. Anyway, the point is that this is in March of 71 that my dad is getting this award, and also he knows that he's got a terminal case of cancer, and I think probably we did too, but he was still able to go and get the award. Okay, now back to the story. I had joined the Vietnam Veterans Against the War in early 1970 while serving in South Vietnam as an English language instructor in an obscure Air Force program known as Operation Palace Dog. I'll tell you more about Palace Dog later on, but for now it's enough to know that I had come to the conclusion that we, the Vietnam veterans, were being exploited by our government, and that the American people was being deceived too. So I turned against the war. As you can well imagine, the VVAW in Vietnam was an underground organization composed almost entirely of enlisted men, most of whom occupied various rear echelon positions in personnel or finance, or in a few cases as journalists, with the stars and stripes. Some very important VVAW members were actually employed inside MACV headquarters in sensitive intelligence jobs that gave them access to the unvarnished and often unpleasant truth, as opposed to the overly optimistic propaganda that was routinely presented in official communiques. Being in the Vietnam Veterans Against the War in Vietnam was considered subversive and precariously close to treason. So I did not become an active member until I returned to the United States and started college. But then I did my part. When asked by the leadership to form a chapter at Fulton in order to educate the public about the realities of the Vietnam War, I did so without hesitation. And when I was invited to appear on a local TV show to testify about my own experience, I readily agreed. I was living at my parents' home at the time when a person at VVAW National Headquarters contacted me and told me that Jane Fonda was planning to visit Fulton to speak against the war. Like most veterans, we weren't happy that Miss Fonda had allowed herself to be photographed while sitting and giggling on a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun in Hanoi. That was not our way of doing business. But the VVAW leadership wanted to capitalize on the publicity the sexy starlet would generate, and they persuaded her to become one of our sponsors. The strategy worked. A local CBS affiliate in Schenectady learned that Fonda was coming to Fulton, and when she told them that she wanted to work with the VVAW, CBS asked us to put together a discussion panel. It was their idea, but we liked it, and we went along. A prominent VVAW leader came up from New York and stayed at my house, and when Fonda arrived at the airport, we picked her up. I took photographs of her for the college newspaper and for the VVAW, and we spent some time with her that evening while she met with the president of the Student Association. The following day, Fonda spoke to the student body at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and later that afternoon we had our veterans panel discussion in a lounge in the Student Union building. There were 5 of us on the panel, all members of VVAW, each with a different story to tell. They sat us at a cafeteria table in front of a bunch of microphones and TV cameras. And what with all the reporters, lights, and onlookers, I was pretty nervous. In fact, I was too nervous to listen to anyone else, and I really do not remember what any of the other veterans said. I do remember that I was the second person to speak, and that we each had 10 minutes to tell our own individual story, and that I gave the 10-minute version of the story that appears in the following chapters. I also remember that people in the audience were truly amazed at what I said. I didn't have time to go into detail, obviously, but my story was so bizarre and so different from what the other veterans had to say that it just grabbed everyone's attention. The CBS affiliate in Schenectady broadcast the show that night on local TV, and I watched it with my parents at home. It was exciting at first. They showed excerpts from Jane Fonda's speech before the energized student body, and they showed excerpts from our VVAW discussion panel, which was held later that afternoon. The only problem was they omitted my story. As I later learned, CBS headquarters in New York had decided it was too controversial and censored this compliant affiliate. That was in the early spring of 1971, and in the fall, I transferred to the Rochester Institute of Technology. Although disillusioned by my experience with CBS and determined to spend less time on politics and more time concentrating on my studies, I agreed to set up a VVAW chapter at RIT. I held a few meetings, most of which were rather disorganized and uninspiring. I would bring in buttons and anti-war literature, and about 10 people, some veterans, some not, would show up. By then, the Vietnam War was winding down, and as I mentioned, the meetings did not generate a lot of interest, but the VVAW was still at the top of the government's enemies list. And I remember that a couple of fellows claiming to be pro-military veterans attended the last meeting and complained that we were hurting the war effort. I don't know if that's true, but I had the feeling they were I don't know if it's true, but I had the feeling they were infiltrators sent by the FBI or military intelligence. Despite the hecklers, I gave my usual talk, the same 10-minute anecdote CBS had censored, and that's when the trouble started. After that meeting, I was approached by 2 men while I was walking to my car. It was cold and dark outside, and we were the only people in the parking lot. The man in charge was wearing a nicely tailored overcoat and a gray suit. He was about 30 years old, with a crew cut and a pockmarked face, and dead eyes that made him look like a shark. The other man was wearing a navy blue pea coat and had the dull look of an off-duty cop. But the guy in the suit was definitely CIA. He presented his government credentials and said, "You've been talking too much about Laos. We don't like the words you're saying. None of it's true, and if you keep telling lies, bad things could happen." Unquote. It was dark, and they had come at me from behind, taking me by surprise. And to say the least, it was frightening to know that the CIA was following me. I had just gotten married, and when I told my wife, she became terrified. We started to worry that our phone was tapped and that the government would cut off my financial aid, all of which, in view of my work with the VVAW, led to a general paranoia that in turn exhumed the bad memories I had buried in my subconscious. I started having nightmares and flashbacks, and for the sake of my marriage and sanity, I dropped out of the VVAW and entered psychological counseling. To this day, more than 30 years later, I still feel threatened. I still have a lack of trust in the government, but my family has grown, and for reasons that any Vietnam veteran will understand, I have decided that now is the time to come out of my shell. I just hope the effort proves worthwhile. Well, that's the first person introduction in this book. It will, um, I'm not going to read the book to you because I so much want you to get a copy of it and read it yourself and share this story, because if we can share this story, then we can open people's minds as to what really has been going on. And of course, Doug's other books also tell the story in a different way, but by following this amazing military effort, um, as Doug was talking about earlier today, that the military knew that the CIA was doing the drug deals, and they hated it. They didn't like it at all. The straight military. And I'm sure now we see what happened was my father was just in a position. He happened to be the guy that could possibly do something. And so what he tried to do is the story in TDY. So what this book represents is a person having what George Webb and I call a McDuff moment, where if you get to a certain point and you see what's happening and how just terrible and awful it really is, then something inside you makes you want to do something. And if you can conceive of something that can possibly work, at a certain point you try it. And that's what McDuff did. And you know, I'm just so honored to have all of you, every one of you, to be on this journey with me. It's just tremendous. I can't imagine a better way to enter into my the last part of my 70 or whatever we get nowadays. Um, and not to say I'm not going to be around. I'm going to be around a long time, but I do feel that something is happening right now that's helping me. The universe is helping me to put my life together in a way that I was unable to see before, and with this perspective that we have now, that my dad was right there, and trying to stop the inundation of addictive drugs into this country by our own intelligence agencies. And I'm so proud of him. And, I'm going to going to keep on telling the story best I can. Well, guys, I'm going to call it a night early. It's Saturday night, and I think my wife wants to watch a little television, and we're going to sit down and relax together. Have a great Sunday, and wow. Oh, hey, guys, March. I got to tell you, this March is going to be so exciting here on the channel. Um, I'll be filling out the calendar with Jumping Mouse over the weekend, over tomorrow, but you're going to see some great new stuff coming along. One thing that I'll tease to you right now is we've got an author coming on Wednesday, March the 10th. The author of a new book about the genocide in Ireland. It's the real history of the genocide in Ireland. It's the best work that's been done on it since The Great Hunger by Cecil Woodham Smith. So that author will be with us on March the 10th. But we're also going to have a series on Friday nights with authors from the LaRouche organization and their fabulous new booklet that I featured last Friday called The Great Leap Backwards, all about the World Economic Forum's Great Reset, which is really a great leap backwards, and the economic consequences of that we'll talk about with Paul Gallagher, the author of that portion of the booklet, on Friday night at 8 p.m. Monday night, we continue every Monday night with our new series with the great Garland Nixon, a journalist, a radio talk show host, and a terrific thinker who's asked me that we talk about Syria on Monday night. And I think that's a very appropriate topic to go into in view of the fact that our president thought that we should do some defensive precision bombing. And I like that word. It's precision defense. You know, we're defending ourselves by bombing somebody in Syria, right? Well, that'll be our topic among whatever else we want to talk about, because it's free, and we will enjoy sharing our thoughts together. As I've really enjoyed every moment of it so far. So thanks, Doug Valentine, once again for this morning's interview, which I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It just makes me feel so, I guess, grounded. It's given me a sense of who I am and where my place is, and what were the forces that shaped our whole family and our lives, and not only ours, but thousands and thousands of other people, as the Vietnam War was, it's such a horrible tragedy. So a lot of great stuff coming up. You'll read about it all at screamingospreys.com, and scroll down to the calendar where you can see what's going on. But Monday nights, it's going to be Garland Nixon. Tuesday, probably reading. Wednesdays, I do my book review, except for when I have a guest like our author for the Holocaust book. And I thought I had it in front of me, but I guess I didn't. So, oh well, forgive me. That's just a sign that I'm tired, and I think it's time to call it a night. Thanks very much again. And I guess I should do a plug for my Patreon, since this is the end of the month, and it's been a month without any of the YouTube income, got demonetized. So if you haven't joined the Patreon, maybe if you could do that over the weekend, that'd be great. Thanks, everybody. Good night.